You've spent good money on your stereo and it still doesn't sound right. I've been there. I've watched people pour cash into speakers and amplifiers only to end up disappointed, not because the gear was bad, but because of simple mistakes almost everyone makes. Today I'm breaking down the 7 most common hi-fi stereo mistakes that quietly ruin sound quality and, in some cases, actually damage your equipment. These are the errors I see over and over again. If you want more honest, no-nonsense advice like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Let's get straight into it. Treating speaker placement like an afterthought. This is still the single biggest sound quality killer I run into, and it never stops surprising me. Someone will spend weeks comparing measurements, reading reviews, and carefully matching an amplifier to a pair of speakers, then place those speakers flat against the wall or jammed into the corners because it looks tidy or because the room layout seems to demand it. The result is almost always the same. The system never lives up to its potential. When a speaker sits too close to a rear wall, especially a ported design, the bass output rises dramatically in certain frequencies while canceling in others. Corners make it worse by loading the speaker on 2 boundaries at once. You end up with uneven, boomy, low end that shifts depending on where you sit. Mid-range clarity suffers because early reflections from nearby surfaces arrive only a few milliseconds after the direct sound and smear the image. The soundstage collapses into a vague cloud instead of a stable left-to-right picture with depth and specific instrument locations. A reliable starting framework is the equilateral triangle. Measure the distance between the centers of the 2 tweeters, then set your listening chair so that the distance from each tweeter to your ears is roughly the same. That geometric balance helps the brain lock on to a solid center image. From there, experiment with toe-in. Some speakers image best when aimed almost directly at the listening position. Others open up and create a wider stage with only mild toe-in or even none at all. The only way to know is to move them a few degrees at a time while listening to a familiar track with strong vocals and clear imaging cues. Distance from the front wall matters a lot. Many designs prefer at least 2 to 3 feet of breathing room, so the rear wave has space to develop without immediate boundary reinforcement. Sidewall distance should also be kept as equal as possible between left and right speakers. Asymmetry here is one of the quickest ways to make the stereo image drift or collapse on one side. Speaker height is another quiet factor. Ideally, the tweeters sit near ear level when you're seated. If they're much higher or lower, the tonal balance and focus change. I still see people place speakers on the same shelf as a turntable or receiver with no isolation, or leave them on soft carpet without spikes or stands. Vibrations and unstable platforms blur the sound further. Even small moves, pulling a speaker 6 inches forward, adjusting the angle by a few degrees, or leveling both cabinets can produce bigger improvements than most component upgrades. Placement costs nothing except time and attention. Use it before you start blaming the gear. Subscribe for more no-nonsense audio content. Completely ignoring the room. Your listening room is not a neutral container. It is an active part of the system, and in most homes it is the weakest link. Hard parallel surfaces, large windows, bare floors, and empty corners create strong reflections and standing waves that color everything you hear. At the other extreme, some people fill the room with foam panels until the space feels dead and airless. Neither extreme is ideal. The practical goal is controlled liveliness enough, absorption and diffusion to tame the worst problems without killing the natural sense of space. The most effective first step is treating the primary reflection points on the side walls. Sit in your normal listening chair and have someone slide a mirror along each side wall. Wherever you can see the reflection of a speaker in the mirror, mark that spot. Those are the locations where early sidewall reflections reach your ears only a short time after the direct sound. A few well-placed absorption panels or even thick, dense curtains at those points can sharpen imaging and reduce smear dramatically. Floor reflections are easier to address. A thick rug or carpet between the speakers and the listening position reduces the bounce that often muddies the mid-range. Ceiling reflections are harder in most living rooms, but even a simple hanging diffuser or a bookshelf arranged with varying depths of books can help break up energy. Corners are where low-frequency energy tends to build up. If the bass feels thick or uneven, modest bass traps or dense absorption in the front corners often smooth things out more than people expect. You do not need to turn the room into a studio. In many ordinary rectangular spaces, cleaning up the first sidewall reflections, adding a solid rug, and keeping the speakers in listening position away from the exact center of the room already produces a large improvement. I've walked into houses with expensive electronics and poorly placed speakers in untreated rooms that sounded confused and fatiguing. The same modest speakers, carefully positioned in a room with basic reflection control, often sound more engaging and natural. The room will always impose its character on the system. Fighting it with more expensive components rarely works, as well as simply working with the space you have. Measure, listen, make one change at a time, and give your ears a chance to recalibrate. The difference between a compromised room and a thoughtfully managed one is often larger than the difference between mid-fi and high-end gear. If this helped you, hit subscribe for more honest hi-fi advice. Impedance and power mismatches that stress the system. This mistake can quietly cost you real money in repairs. A surprising number of people connect speakers without ever checking what their amplifier is actually designed to handle. Many vintage receivers and a good number of modern integrated amplifiers are happiest with 6 or 8 ohm loads. When you hang a pair of 4 ohm speakers on them, or worse, run 2 pairs of speakers in parallel so the amplifier sees something closer to 2 or 3 ohms, the amp has to work much harder. Current draw rises, heat builds up, protection circuits start triggering, and in the worst cases, the output transistors or the power supply simply fail. I've watched people damage perfectly good receivers by using cheap speaker selector switches that simply parallel every pair of speakers without any impedance protection. The switch feels convenient until the amp goes into protection every time both pairs are selected, or until it fails completely. If you genuinely need more than one pair of speakers, use a proper speaker selector that maintains a safe minimum impedance, or wire the speakers in series when the amplifier can tolerate the higher load. Series wiring is often safer for the amp, though it does change the overall volume and damping behavior. Clipping is another silent problem that gets overlooked. When an underpowered amplifier is pushed into hard distortion, the clipped waveform is no longer a clean sine wave. It contains sharp edges that translate into excess high-frequency energy. That energy goes straight to the tweeters. The system may not sound dramatically broken. At first, it just becomes harsh and fatiguing, but over time the tweeters can be damaged or fail completely. This is especially common when people try to fill a large room with a modest receiver and inefficient speakers. Matching power and impedance is basic system hygiene. Look at the amplifier's minimum rated impedance and its continuous power rating into that load. Check the speaker's nominal impedance and sensitivity. A higher sensitivity speaker needs less power to reach the same volume, which reduces stress on the amplifier. Conversely, low sensitivity speakers demand more current and more voltage swing. Vintage solid-state receivers often have less robust power supplies and less sophisticated protection than modern designs, so they are less forgiving of low impedance loads. Tube amplifiers have their own rules and can be damaged by improper loading in different ways. Read the manuals, measure if necessary, don't assume it will be fine. A system that runs cool and stays within its design limits will sound cleaner and last longer. One that is constantly stressed will eventually remind you of the mismatch, usually at the most inconvenient moment. Dirty connections and neglected maintenance. Oxidation and dirt are the quiet enemies of good sound. Over months and years, RCA plugs, speaker binding posts, amplifier terminals, and especially the stylus on a turntable collect a thin layer of grime, oxide, and atmospheric contamination. The result is a dull, veiled presentation, subtle channel imbalance, crackles, or intermittent dropouts that make you think a component is failing when the real problem is simply dirty contact. On the vinyl side, a dirty stylus is one of the fastest ways to ruin the sound of a record. Dust and residue on the diamond tip increase surface noise, reduce high-frequency detail, and can make the music sound muffled or harsh. It also accelerates record wear because the stylus is no longer tracking cleanly in the groove. A quick pass with a carbon fiber brush before every side is basic housekeeping. Periodically, a proper stylus cleaner liquid or gel designed for the purpose removes the stubborn buildup that a dry brush cannot. Neglecting this step is one of the most common reasons people decide their turntable doesn't sound good anymore. Electronics suffer from the same neglect. Volume pots, selector switches, and input jacks oxidize. A good contact cleaner such as Deoxit applied carefully and sparingly can restore clarity and quiet operation that people often attribute to needing a new preamp or receiver. Speaker wire connections matter more than most realize. Excess bare copper left exposed can short against the chassis or another terminal and destroy an amplifier's output stage in an instant. Strip only the length you need, make firm contact under the binding post or in the banana plug, and check tightness every few months. Vibration and thermal cycling gradually loosen connections. These maintenance habits cost almost nothing and take only a few minutes. Yet they protect both the sound quality and the longevity of the gear. A system that is kept clean and properly connected simply performs closer to its potential. One that is left to accumulate dirt and oxidation slowly loses resolution, dynamics, and reliability until the owner starts shopping for replacements that were never necessary. Subscribe for more no-nonsense audio content. Turntable setup errors that undermine vinyl. Vinyl has surged back into popularity, which means a lot of people are unpacking brand new turntables or dragging old ones out of closets for the first time in years. The format can sound wonderful, but only when the basics are done correctly. Small setup errors here produce large sonic problems and can even damage records. Tracking force is one of the first places things go wrong. Too light and the stylus mistracks, jumping or distorting on louder passages while digging unevenly into the groove walls. Too heavy, and both the stylus and the record wear faster than necessary. Every cartridge has a recommended range, usually printed in the manual or on the manufacturer's site. Use a proper stylus force gauge. The cheap digital ones work fine, and set it in the middle of the recommended window, then fine-tune by ear if needed. Anti-skate should be set to roughly match the tracking force so the stylus sits evenly in both groove walls. Cartridge alignment is ignored more often than it should be. A misaligned cartridge creates rising distortion as the stylus moves toward the inner grooves, exactly where many records already struggle. Overhang, offset angle, and zenith all matter. A simple 2-point protractor, bare-walled or Lofgren geometry, is enough for most people. Take the time to get the stylus tip to sit correctly on both null points. Vertical tracking angle, VTA, and azimuth also affect balance and detail. Small adjustments here can clean up the sound noticeably once the major alignment is correct. Phono stage mistakes are equally common. Many modern turntables include a built-in preamp with a line level output. If you plug that into a receiver's dedicated phono input, you are stacking two RIAA equalization and gain stages. The result is usually excessive volume, distortion, or a strange tonal balance. Check the switch on the turntable, often labeled phono, line, and match it to the input you are using. Only one phono stage should be active in the signal path. Older receivers expect a true phono level signal. Newer ones may not even have a phono input at all. Stylus and cartridge replacement trips people up as well. Buying a replacement stylus based only on a photo or a vague model number often leads to the wrong part. Confirm the exact cartridge model, usually visible once the head shell is removed. If the cartridge is decades old or the stylus is heavily worn, replacing the entire cartridge with a known modern design is often the cleaner solution. Proper setup, correct force, accurate alignment, single phono stage. Clean stylus turns a mediocre vinyl experience into something engaging and musical. Skipping these steps wastes the potential of the format and the records themselves. Obsessing over accessories while neglecting the basics. This is the trap that catches enthusiasts after the initial excitement of buying gear. Once the speakers, amplifier, and source are in place, attention often shifts to exotic interconnects, specialty power cords, isolation platforms, cable elevators, or the latest tweak promising transformative results. Some of these accessories can make small, real differences in specific systems under specific conditions. Most of the time, they become expensive distractions from larger, more fundamental problems. I have watched people debate cable directionality, dielectric materials, and cryogenic treatments for hours while their speakers remain 3 inches from the front wall in a completely untreated room. The difference between poor placement and careful placement, or between a reflective untreated space and one with basic first reflection control, is almost always larger than the difference between a decent mid-priced interconnect and a very expensive one. Clean power delivery, proper gain structure through the system, solid component matching, and mechanical stability matter more than most boutique accessories. Isolation can help turning a ringing glass shelf into a more inert support, for example, but it will not fix speakers that are poorly positioned or a room that is fighting the system. Power conditioners can reduce noise in electrically hostile environments, yet they cannot compensate for an amplifier that is being asked to drive a load it was never designed for. The priority list should start with the biggest levers: speaker placement and symmetry, room interaction, clean and correct signal routing, appropriate gain staging, and basic maintenance. Once those are solid, smaller refinements become worth exploring. Be honest about what is actually limiting the sound right now. If the image is unstable, the bass is uneven, or the system sounds congested, the answer is rarely a new set of cables. Spend the time and, if necessary, the modest money on the fundamentals first. The accessories conversation becomes far more meaningful after the system is already performing close to its potential. Starting at the opposite end of the priority list is one of the most reliable ways to spend money without hearing the improvement you hope for. Not really listening, or listening in the wrong way. This last mistake is more psychological than technical, yet it may be the most common of all. Many people finish the physical setup, play 2 or 3 familiar tracks at a moderate volume for 5 or 10 minutes, and decide the system is done. Others fall into the opposite habit, constantly swapping components, cables, or supports without ever giving the current configuration a fair chance to show what it can do once properly optimized. Good sound reveals itself over time and under realistic conditions. Sit in the actual listening chair, not standing to the side or wandering around the room. Play music you know intimately at levels you would actually use for enjoyment, and stay there for longer sessions. 20 or 30 minutes is far more revealing than a quick A-B snippet. Pay attention to whether the stereo image stays locked and stable, whether the bass remains controlled, and even as the volume rises, and whether the presentation starts to feel fatiguing or harsh after a while. Those longer listens expose problems that short checks miss. Small physical adjustments still matter here. A slight change in toe-in, moving the chair a few inches forward or back, or even raising or lowering the seat height can shift the entire tonal balance and focus. The system and the room interact with your body position more than most people realize. Confirmation bias is another quiet trap. After spending money on a new component or accessory, it is very easy to convince yourself it sounds better even when the difference is tiny or imaginary. The most reliable antidote is methodical listening. Keep a short, consistent list of reference tracks that cover different strengths, a well-recorded vocal, a piece with complex imaging, something with demanding bass, and a track that tends to reveal harshness. Listen to the same material before and after any change, preferably without knowing which configuration is playing if you can manage it. Be willing to admit when something did not improve the system or even made it worse. In the end, the entire point of the gear is to enjoy music. If the process of optimizing, measuring, and upgrading has become more stressful or obsessive than pleasurable, it is worth stepping back. Get the fundamentals in place: placement, room, clean connections, proper matching, then spend more time listening and less time chasing the next tweak. The systems that ultimately satisfy are usually the ones whose owners learn to sit still, pay attention, and let the music do the talking. Wrapping up, those are the 7 mistakes I see most often. Bad speaker placement, ignoring the room, impedance and power problems, dirty connections and neglect, turntable setup errors, chasing accessories instead of basics, and not listening carefully enough. The good news is that most of these cost little or nothing to correct. Moving speakers, cleaning contacts, treating a couple of reflection points, and taking time with cartridge setup can transform a system that felt disappointing into one that actually delivers the emotion and detail you bought it for. I've made versions of every single one of these mistakes myself. The systems that finally sounded right were the ones where I stopped chasing the next upgrade and started paying attention to the boring fundamentals. That's still the advice I give anyone who asks. If this helped you spot something in your own setup, let me know in the comments. What mistake have you made that taught you the most? I read them. And if you want more practical, no-nonsense talk about getting better sound from the gear you already own, stick around. New videos are on the way. Thanks for watching. Now go move those speakers a little and listen again. You might be surprised.